We've got all these pieces, but let's get our Frederik fungi to this state. Here I am at the point where we need to stuff the stem and insert the cardboard circle. Now, one thing I want you to think about is that if you are particularly worried about this being very stable, you could actually insert another cardboard circle at the bottom here. It would have to be a different size, obviously. The 2.5 inch, 6.5 centimeter circle that I've recommended is obviously not stem bottom sized. So you could add another cardboard circle here, and it gets very stable, and it sits very nicely when you do that. It's not essential for this piece, so I haven't written it into the pattern, but that's just something to think about. And now what we need to do is we need to add both weighted stuffing and fluffy stuffing to the stem. If you are relatively new to my patterns, I do have a whole video in the gnome schooling playlist. And I know that Frederik may be more gnome-like or more mushroom-like, depending on how you feel about him, but he is sort of based on a lot of my gnome approach, and I have the gnome schooling playlist, and there's a whole thing in there on materials that I recommend, different kinds of fluffy and weighted stuffing, considerations on key techniques. So that's some place that you might want to visit, and I will link it in the show notes below. Frederik is relatively short and squat, so weighted stuffing is not the only thing keeping him from toppling over. So I say about 1/3 of the body filled with weighted stuffing. Obviously, it's going to depend on the density of your weighted stuffing. The split peas that I like using are quite dense for their size, or they're quite weighty for their density, whatever I want to say here. Whereas if you're using other things, you may find you need less or more. After you've added your circular cardboard bit, it's a great time to put Frederik on your palm and kind of wiggle him. And if he wants to topple, you might want to take out all of the stuff you've done and add more weighted stuffing. So I'm going to start with about 1/3 of the stem / body getting weighted stuffing. Next up, I'm going to add the fluffy stuffing. I go into really great detail in another video about how to stuff toys, but generally speaking, you want to start with small amounts, stuff carefully, and make sure you're going all the way to the edges. So sort of use your fingertips to broaden it out and flatten things down. You can then use your outside hand to kind of shape against that, because you can really distort things when you're stuffing, but if you just kind of keep pushing back with the outside hand, you'll kind of achieve a nice balance of stuffed thoroughly and all the way to the edges and the sides of your stuffed animal or stuffed toy, but also the shape that it wants, because knitted fabric obviously can be distorted by how we stuff things. If this is going to be a toy, I'd suggest using plastic rather than paper or cardboard for your circle. And I would also suggest thinking about putting your weighted stuffing in some kind of a little container, like a little gauze bag or the toe of a pair of nylon stockings or something like that to keep them contained. Because what we don't want is we don't want the weighted stuffing coming up and under the cardboard circle and kind of making noises and creeping around. And we also don't want the cardboard circle getting bent and distorted if it's going to be a toy. So there are some other options like craft foam, which is flexible, but if you do several layers might be what you need, or just some kind of piece of thin plastic. I know some people have had 3D printing options for their gnomes and their toys. So that's something to think about too. All right, so we're not going to stuff above this garter ridge here, but we want to stuff firmly up to it so that Frederik has a nice firm body on which to rest his cap so that it's not very tippy. So this is a bit of an art rather than a science. You want to stuff firmly up to that point, but not above it. And as I'm going, one of the things I'm doing is as I get to that top, you want to kind of like tuck it around so that it is the edges of the disc of fabric of stuffing you're putting, if it's sort of tucked down, the grippiness of the fabric will hopefully keep it from sliding up and kind of coming up under the cap here and puffing it up. You want this area to be fairly flat and you don't want stuffing in there. All right, so I'm just going to kind of tuck down around the sides so that it's not just a little ball of stuffing on the top, but it's kind of integrated in here. It obviously looks different here because I haven't put a cardboard base here, but as I stuff, I can get a nice flat base. He will stand nicely, our little Frederik here. So now I'm going to add the cardboard circle. If you have made Dr. Fungi, you know that in that pattern, there's sort of a pearl turning ridge, and there's quite a sharp demarcation of difference between the gill section of his hat and the mushroom cap section. Whereas Frederik, you may find you've got sort of more of a softer demarcation. It's okay if the little bit of the gills comes up and around and gives sort of a nice little character. I'm looking at this thinking that this is a little too big for what I want. One of the ways I can tell that is that lots of red is wanting to come down and I'm having to fight against that. So all I'm going to do is take this out and just gently trim a little bit around. If this isn't perfectly circular, it's totally fine. Just needs to be circular-ish. So I'm just going to take a couple of millimeters off of each side here as I trace around. But like I said, I don't need it to be perfectly circular. If I'm a little bit off, it's really no big deal. As long as it looks round enough as the Frederik is stuffed, it's all good. So that's looking a little better. It's giving me just a little better sense. It doesn't look so strained. The fabric is not straining at the edges. It's not stretched super tight. It just feels comfortable there. And now I'm going to work the next set of decreases that are in the pattern before we stuff a bit of the hat. So what we basically do is we work a little bit longer, stuff a bit, work a little longer, and do the final stuffing. I'm going to keep my Frederik on the work surface here so that the weight of his body doesn't stretch out the size of the stitches I'm making now. We obviously want the stitching to kind of be the same all the way up. So just remember to support Frederik as you work the next step. Worked a few decreases and extra rounds, and now we're ready to stuff. Now, if you are on DPNs, as I am in this example, and you are struggling with not having enough space, if you take your fourth DPN and slide half the stitches on, and having a square shape may be easier than having a triangular shape for giving you access into the cap here to stuff. So that's just something to think about. Magic loop people, obviously when we're using magic loop, we can slide it onto the cords and it's nice and flexible. All right, so as ever, we're going to be stuffing in layers and trying to push the stuffing out to the edges of our work as we go. So start with not a lot of stuffing. And then as you go, sort of push it in and then just sort of spread things out. I usually find these two fingers work best in these circumstances. And just keep stuffing up a little bit at a time. And don't worry about getting too close. We're going to be knitting a little bit more and coming back and stuffing this last little bit. And it's often really annoying when the fluffy ends get stuck on our stitches. So just leave a little bit of space for yourself to work in because you're going to be coming back and stuffing some more. One thing I've been playing around with is testing whether if we put our final yarn through these final stitches in a purlwise fashion, just sort of threading it through as is common, or knitwise slipping them off one by one, if it changes how tidy they are. And currently I'm playing with the idea that this twisted, because it does twist them when we go through knitwise, I'm curious whether it produces a smoother, more finished look. And I think I am coming to the conclusion that it makes a difference. So I'd be interested in your thoughts if you experiment with it as well. I'm going to put my yarn through, and I'm going to suggest that if you want to knot your yarn, that you actually knot it away from the top. So put your yarn through the knitting and come out at your least favorite side. So if you have a side that you like the most, maybe it's how the fabric's behaving along the bottom or something like that, come out away from that. And then what you can do is you can tie a little knot in the fabric away from the top, which is such a small space that it's really hard to be neat and tidy. And I usually go under or through the ladder of one of the stitches, the running thread here between the stitches, and make a little, having made a little loop, if I go through that twice, now my yarn is now really thin or really short, so I'm going to have to kind of go through very strangely by using the back of my needle rather than the tip of my needle, but it still threads it through, and that's the main thing. Once I've done that and tightened that little knot onto the ladder, when I pull the end through, it will pop the knot under the surface of the fabric. If you use a knot on the surface of the fabric, obviously it's harder to do, but the running thread is already to the back of the fabric, and so it will disguise it quite nicely. So I'm just going to push mine through now and pull nice and tight, and now we can see that that knot is gone. You can see that things aren't perfectly sloped here where I was stuffing, so if you want, you can always come in and kind of pull at the stuffing afterwards, or push and kind of play with things as we continue to work after stuffing. Sometimes we undo some of the careful work we've done. So just go in and get things the way you want them to be there. A couple of quick notes on making the arms and nose. So the nose is a short stubby bit of I-cord. You will probably have a side that is a nicer side and a side that is less nice. So just make sure to tie so the less nice side is sort of folded together. I find that for the most part, tying this is enough, but you may want to, after you tie it, just have a look and see if you want to actually stitch it together. But we are going to be stitching it onto the beard, and at that point we can always kind of tidy it up if we feel it's necessary. So once you've got this on, you have two options. One is to bury one of the ends right away and then use only one end to tie onto the beard. The other is to leave both, use one to stitch onto the beard, and then tie a knot under the other side of the beard. So I'm going to leave this right now. Then when it comes to the arms, you may notice that we do something slightly different if you've knit my other patterns before, and we don't knit the arm in completely one stitch count. We actually do a little bit of increasing and then a little bit of decreasing to try to make the hands a little more spherical or bulbous. But you may find that right after you've finished it, it's not really doing that, or sewing in this end for some reason may kind of change things. In the written description, I talk about tapping the end of the hand, and so I just wanted to show you what that looks like in case that is puzzling you. So I've buried my end up into my arm. I can cut it now, and depending on how I do it, just even burying that can pull it together and make it kind of more bulbous. So you can see I've got a nice fairly round shape there right now. But let's say something has happened and it's not looking that way. What I can do instead, like let's say it's kind of flattened out, what I can do instead is just kind of tap this back in. One side of the beard will have ends from where you sewed in all four other ends, or all three other ends, I should say. And so that's obviously going to be the wrong side. And then we've got the right side of the beard, and now we're going to sew our nose to the center of that. All right, so I've got the end side of my nose here and the rounded side here. I want the rounded side to go down while I'm working so that when it comes up, it kind of curves with that side there. So right now we're going to treat it sort of like a flat piece. So I want the rounded end down, and I want the flat, longer sides against the beard. And this end here, where I tied things together, is going to be facing upwards. And now I'm just going to stitch through the beard and the nose in a few places, and secure it down. And that should be all we need. So now what we can do is we can pop it up and we can have a feel and feel what we feel like. If it's going to be a toy, you may want to actually come in and sew this bottom bit down to the beard just so that you have an extra point of strength. But if it's going to be a decoration, you can skip that. Now what I'm going to do is I can bring this end through it again to the beard side, or to the underside of the beard, and we can just tie those ends off. So I'm just going to come through both layers of nose and beard. So that's an option. If you had already buried one end, you could instead just sew it on and make a knot. And now you have a couple of options. If you are going to be trimming the loops of the beard, you may want to just leave these to trail behind and add an extra 2 strands of beard. I'm going to leave mine loopy, so I will be wanting to cut those. And rather than just cutting them after knotting them, I'm going to bury them either in the back of the beard or through the nose. And there we have nose and beard. Boop, boop, boop. So now we're going to sew them right under the little garter ridge that we made when we purled around before starting the gills. And by sewing that right up against that garter ridge, we're going to find placement really easy. You will have 2 shaping lines from where we did our decreases, and I find the beard nestles really nicely right between those 2 lines if you're looking to use those as a place to center it. You can, of course, center it on one of those lines if you don't mind that. I like to center my beard away from those lines so that they are on either edge, and I just find it doesn't draw attention to them. Then we're only looking at the face, whereas if we have it here, it's almost like the face draws attention to the shaping line. I always find it easier to sew on my beards when my body is facing kind of upside down. So I've got my shaping line, I've got my little garter ridge here, so I'm just going to go under a full stitch and then through the corner of the beard. Do that a couple times. And if this is going to be a decoration, you don't need to attach in a lot of places. You could just stitch across a couple times. If it's a toy, I would stitch it, much more thoroughly. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to sew sort of underneath the nose and just go down and come up, go down and come up. Again, I'm keeping an eye on the fact that I'm making sure that I'm going through both layers of the beard and then also through the body. It's easy to kind of like wave across and only grab body. And I'm also making sure that I'm keeping things right up next to that garter ridge. It's easy to start sort of drifting away. So make sure that you're keeping things right next to that. Down and up. And the nice thing about having those little, this little bit made in garter is it kind of hides our stitches nicely as we're working across now, sewing across. So you can see that little line there just blends all in with the whole garter stitch atmosphere of our beard top here. So now I'll go through the corner under a full stitch. And one more time. And now if you're doing a decoration, you can just plunge it across and trim, or you can flip the beard up, kind of go across a little bit and under and tie a knot under here before then making your yarn disappear. All right, Frederik's almost finished here. He just needs his little wee arms. There will probably be a good side and a not so good side. Generally speaking, the not so good side is the side where that was at the back of the I-cord. You could always just kind of make it look even better by rolling it a little bit, almost like you're making a little Play-Doh snake or a little arm out of Play-Doh. And this really helps just redistribute the tension, and you might find you don't even have a side you don't like. But whatever the case, find which side you do like best and have that be the visible side and stitch that right up next to the place where the beard and the body come together and cover the end of that little area there. So I'm just going to go under the fabric right at the corner where the beard and the body are meeting there. I'm going to go a couple times in this direction. Now I'll go back through the arm and I'll go a couple of times in the opposite diagonal direction. So we went once up and to the left. Now we'll go up and to the right a couple of times. And that should be good. If you're doing a decoration, you're good. If you're doing a toy, you may want to lift the arm up, kind of come down and underneath and just attach one more time, or 2 more times, or 3 more times, depending on the child, and just give them a little bit more security in that direction of strain as well. After making your knot, you can either disappear it up your sleeve, up your arm, or into the body. It's your choice. The stuffing of ends into the I-cord actually almost acts as a form of stuffing. Well, not almost, it does act as a form of stuffing. So if you'd like this to be stiffer or fuller, that's a good thing to do. And here we have our adorable Frederik fungi, a sweet member of the mushroomy community from the Misty Vale Mountains, and who is hopefully bringing delight to you. I'm kind of tempted to make a whole one of these in really sweet rainbow colors and arrange them in a little circle and enjoy them. But I've got 2 little Frederiks now, and I am really enjoying them. Look at the difference that my tension made in the height of that hat. That is so interesting. Look how different those are. So here are my 2 little Frederiks, sweet little fraternal twins.